Right now, on the streets of Havana, young people are proudly wearing the American flag, the very symbol their government spent decades telling them to hate.
Yeah, it's a really striking visual rebellion. I mean, you see teenagers walking right past these old revolutionary murals, and they're wearing a piece of fabric that basically represents their ultimate capitalist rival.
It's wild, and we're going to unpack how we got to this point, because the story behind that visual is just incredible. So let me set the scene for you. Back in December 2014, there was this historic event known as D17, and it kicked off what the press called the Cuban thaw.
Right, December 17th, that was the exact day the United States and Cuba announced they would, temporarily restore diplomatic ties. And this was after more than 50 years of hostility and this massive trade embargo.
Exactly. And look, the political policies have definitely bounced back and forth under different U.S. presidents since that day. But looking at the sources we pulled for this deep dive, it is totally clear that a massive, unstoppable change had already started on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. The momentum was already there.
Right. And here's the crazy statistic. By 2014, Cuban Americans were sending over $3 billion a year back to the island.
Which is huge.
Right.
I mean, $3 billion creates a gravity of its own.
Yep.
That money transformed almost overnight. So it went from being simple survival cash-like,
Yeah.
just enough to buy a bag of rice or maybe some shoes, into the main fuel for this brand new, unauthorized private sector.
Yeah, and the visible results of all that financial pressure building up are just staggering. I mean, over 2 million Cubans left the island in just a 5-year span.
2 million. That's a massive drain.
Right. And for those who stayed behind, they are openly embracing American symbols. We are talking about everything from underground hip-hop culture to the Stars and Stripes. It's basically sparking this massive clash between old socialist ideals and new capitalist desires.
And to figure out how this is actually happening, we really have to pull from a wide variety of sources. So for this deep dive, we're looking at economic data from the Havana Consulting Group. We've got academic breakdowns of Afro-Cuban hip-hop, street-level observations from Reddit threads, reporting from Newsweek, and political commentary from conservative writer Ben Shapiro.
So our mission today is taking you on a journey into how millions of dollars, hip-hop beats, and the American flag are quietly rewriting the rules of Cuban society right from the ground up. And, you really cannot understand this culture war without understanding the money driving it.
Yeah, the money is the foundation of the whole thing.
So we need to look at the shadow economy. Specifically, we need to talk about remittances.
Right, so remittances are simply the funds sent by relatives living abroad back to their families in their home country. And prior to 2009, families used this money almost exclusively for basic survival.
Like literally just keeping the lights on.
Exactly. A relative in Miami would send, say, $50, just so a family in Havana could eat that week. But between 2009 and 2016, the total volume of these remittances grew by a staggering $2 billion.
Wow. A $2 billion jump totally changes the game. I mean, that is no longer just grocery money.
No, not at all. It completely rewired the local economy. So data from the Havana Consulting Group shows that the priority uses for this money expanded from just 6 basic activities to 14 different areas.
14? What are they spending it on now?
Well, Cubans suddenly started using these funds to buy homes, pay for cell phone bills, access the internet, take domestic vacations.
And vacations.
Yeah, actual vacations.
Yeah.
And even hiring private tutors for their kids.
That is fascinating. But I want to pause on the mechanics of this because this is the part that blows my mind. The U.S. embargo completely cuts Cuba off from the global banking system.
Right, no direct banking ties.
So you cannot just wire money to a bank in Havana. How does $2 billion extra dollars actually get into the hands of ordinary people?
It happens through remittance agencies like Western Union and Cuba. They basically stepped in to fill the massive void left by the banking system. And they have to rely on complex workarounds and, physical distribution.
Physical distribution, like literally carrying cash.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes that means utilizing mulas or mules, which are people who physically carry cash on flights from Miami down to Havana.
Okay, so they basically created a massive informal Venmo system for an entire nation that's cut off from the grid. They act almost like the angel investors of Havana.
That analogy totally holds up when you look at the statistics. Remittances now provide 1/3 of the startup money for new micro-businesses in Cuba.
And it goes way beyond just launching a business, right? I read that the money pays for 27% of daily business operations.
Yeah, 27%. So the small family restaurants, they call them paladeries locally, the hair salons, the mechanics, they literally run on dollars sent by relatives overseas.
That is wild.
And a perfect example of this mechanism in action is the Airbnb boom. Between April 2015 and April 2017, Cuban Airbnb hosts earned $40 million.
But wait, how does an Airbnb host in Cuba actually get paid? Like, if I book a room in Havana for my laptop in Chicago, I pay Airbnb in the United States. Airbnb cannot legally wire that money to a Cuban bank.
Right, they can't. So they use those exact same remittance companies. Airbnb sends the money to a company like Cuba in Miami. But Cuba then uses its network to physically distribute the cash to the property owners in Cuba.
No way.
Yeah, they literally send someone to knock on the host's door and hand them the cash. And it's not just Airbnb. Remote freelance workers, like web designers or translators, building sites for European companies, they receive their wages through these exact same shadow channels.
Okay, but hold on. I have to challenge this narrative a bit. If we are talking about billions of dollars injecting into a relatively small island economy, basic economics suggests that money should circulate, right?
You think so, yeah?
Like, a rising tide lifts all boats. So is this influx of cash actually fixing the poverty issue, or is it doing something else entirely?
Well, the research points to a much darker reality, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's not lifting all boats. It is actually creating a really severe new economic divide, and it's based entirely on demographics.
How does that happen?
It comes down to who left the island decades ago. The vast majority of Cubans who immigrated and established successful lives in the United States are white. Therefore, white families back in Cuba receive a highly disproportionate amount of this remittance money.
Oh, I see. So the wealth only flows down very specific family trees.
Exactly. And this dynamic leaves many Afro-Cubans totally locked out of the new private sector. Like, if you do not have an uncle in Miami sending you startup capital, you simply cannot open a bed and breakfast or launch a restaurant.
You're just stuck.
Yeah, you are stuck relying on the state-controlled economy, which pays massive fractions less than the private sector.
Wait, for the listener who might not be, a huge Cuban history buff, how does the historical trauma of the special period play into this new money? Because the sources mention that this inequality has been compounding since then.
Right, so the special period refers to the massive economic crash in Cuba during the 1990s, right after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Because they lost their main sponsor.
Exactly. Cuba lost its main financial backer overnight. The economy just cratered, and the state-provided safety net fractured. People realized that having access to foreign dollars was literally the only way to survive. And the remittance boom we see today is really just the modern turbocharged version of that exact same dynamic.
Yeah.
It's just drastically increasing racial and economic inequality on the island.
And if the money isn't spreading evenly, that builds incredible resentment. And the transition here is so fascinating because we see that economic resentment spilling directly out of the wallets and into the music scene.
Oh, totally.
This divide sparks a massive culture war, and you hear it loudest in Cuban hip-hop.
Yeah, music is the primary battleground, where all these tensions basically boil over into the public sphere.
The academic research from the Journal of Latin American Cultural Studies breaks this down so brilliantly. It actually reminds me a lot of the 1990s East Coast versus West Coast rap battles in the U.S.
That's a great comparison.
Right. But instead of fighting over territory or, record labels, these artists are fighting over the actual survival of a nation's soul. We are looking at a fierce clash between commercial rap and underground or conscious rap.
Let's look at the commercial side first. Groups like Orishas really represent this movement. Their lyrics focus heavily on a concept called generarismo.
We should probably clarify that. When they talk about generarismo, they are specifically talking about the hustle economy, right?
Yes. Generarismo roughly translates to hustling. It refers to marginalized youth hustling foreign tourists for money, consumer goods, or, expensive meals. It often involves companionship, acting as an unauthorized tour guide, or even romance.
And the commercial rappers actively celebrate this behavior.
They do, but they reframe it entirely. Groups like Orishas frame consumerism and tricking tourists as a highly smart, empowering survival strategy. Like in their song Atrevido, they tell a story about a woman who essentially plays a tourist for a fool.
What happens in the song?
Well, she gets the tourist to pay for a fancy hotel room, buy her expensive clothes, and take her to an Orishas concert. And then she and her partner rob him.
Wow. So they just treat the tourist as a helpless mark, someone just waiting to be exploited.
Exactly. They frame the hustler as this clever agent taking control of her life, rather than just a helpless victim of poverty. And this directly challenges the state's socialist ideology, which preaches that honest labor and shared sacrifice are the only paths forward.
Right, because the commercial rappers suggest that extracting wealth from a foreign tourist is a much faster, more realistic way out of the mud.
Yeah, exactly.
But then you have the underground rappers who look at this entire commercial mindset and just fiercely reject it.
They hate it. Rappers like Magia, from the group Obsession, they represent the underground. They view this hustle culture and this obsession with consumerism as an actual moral contamination of the Cuban spirit.
And Magia specifically challenges the narrative around the female hustler, right? She argues that because the Cuban socialist system still provides fundamental basic needs like healthcare, education, and housing, women who hustle tourists are not doing it out of absolute life or death survival.
Right. She says they are driven by a weakness for capitalist consumerism. Like, they don't need the money to avoid starvation. They want the money to buy designer clothes and flat-screen televisions.
So the underground rappers are actively trying to maintain traditional revolutionary values. I think in one of their songs, they literally urge young men to stop acting tough on the streets and go cut sugarcane instead to build their character through hard labor.
Which brings up a staggering irony in this entire culture war.
I am so glad you brought that up. Think about the layers here. You have the underground rappers fiercely defending state socialism and anti-consumerism. You have the commercial rappers embracing capitalism and extracting tourist wealth. Yet both sides are using hip-hop, which is arguably the most deeply American, capitalist-driven art form on the planet, to fight this battle.
The irony is profound,
Mm-hmm.
and the research highlights that the boundary between these two mindsets is incredibly porous. Like, human desire is much more complicated than a simple political binary.
The story about the Vibe magazine photo shoot captures this perfectly. Let's unpack the psychology of that moment.
Yeah, this is a great story. So an American producer traveled to Cuba to set up a photo shoot for Vibe magazine, and it featured an underground anti-capitalist rapper. The producer offered the rapper designer clothing to wear for the shoot, specifically Tommy Hilfiger gear.
Oh man, the friction there must have been intense. Like, what does it feel like to be a revolutionary rapper who realizes their anti-capitalist aesthetic is exactly what a massive American magazine wants to monetize?
Right. The rapper felt deeply conflicted. He knew the brand was a massive symbol of multinational capitalism, the exact thing he rapped against. But the clothing was also highly fashionable, made of premium materials, and virtually impossible to get in Cuba.
So he wanted it.
He really wanted it. It perfectly illustrates how socialist ideals and capitalist desires constantly collide in the minds of young Cubans. They genuinely want to support their country's ideals, but they also want the prosperity and the nice things that the rest of the world enjoys.
And if that internal psychological conflict, wanting the clothes but grappling with the politics, is simmering in the music, it makes total sense that it eventually spills out of the underground clubs and directly onto the streets. Which brings us back to the visual rebellion we mentioned at the start, the American flag.
Yeah, the flag phenomenon is inescapable now. It has become a dominant trend across Havana.
Looking at the reporting from Newsweek, the outline, and multiple massive threads on Reddit, you see ordinary citizens walking around wearing American flags on swim trunks, denim patches, T-shirts, and baseball caps.
Right. In a nation that spent half a century positioning the United States government as its greatest existential threat, the Star-Spangled Banner is now just a ubiquitous fashion statement.
And the Reddit users made a really crucial observation. They noted that locals heavily differentiate between the American people and the American government. Like, they love the culture, even if the politicians clash. Plus, it appears that the local police have largely given up trying to stop it. No one gets arrested just for wearing the flag anymore.
Yeah, because for the youth, the flag has taken on a meaning that is almost completely detached from actual U.S. foreign policy or military history.
So what does that symbol actually mean to a teenager in Havana today?
It represents a profound desire for development and a better, more modern life. It's born out of intense frustration with a stagnant, state-controlled economy that constantly struggles to provide the basics. Like, one young person interviewed in Newsweek actually refused his mandatory military conscription, simply telling the reporter it was pointless. They are completely disillusioned with the revolutionary rhetoric of their grandparents. The flag, to them, symbolizes the prosperity and functional infrastructure they see just 90 miles across the water in Florida.
This is where we have to step back and look at the raw source material, because we have drastically different interpretations depending on who is doing the analyzing. And, just a quick reminder for you listening. We aren't here to take sides or tell you who is right. We just want to understand how different sides are looking at the exact same T-shirt and seeing two entirely different realities. So, let's look at the perspective of American conservative commentator Ben Shapiro, writing for the Freedom's Journal Institute. What does he see when he looks at a Cuban teenager wearing the flag?
Well, Shapiro argues that when foreign dissidents, whether they're marching in Cuba, Hong Kong, or Iran, carry or wear the American flag, it proves the flag acts as a universal, objective symbol of freedom and hope against tyranny.
So he views it as a global validation of American ideals.
Yes, exactly. And he specifically contrasts this international embrace of the flag with his view of domestic politics in the United States. He points to protesters in the U.S. who kneel for or turn their backs on the flag. Shapiro argues that people living in the freest nation in history take that freedom for granted, while those actually suffering under totalitarian regimes recognize the flag's true aspirational value.
Right, so that is the interpretation from an American political commentator. Now, let's pivot and look at how the Cuban government interprets the exact same phenomenon. How did the state officials respond to seeing their youth draped in American colors?
Well, Cuban officials offer a completely inverse narrative. They argue that the blame for the country's economic suffering lies squarely on the shoulders of the U.S. embargo. They view the embargo not as a diplomatic tool, but as an active, ongoing act of economic warfare.
And they argue the goal of that warfare is what exactly?
According to the state officials quoted in the Newsweek reporting, the embargo is specifically designed to make ordinary Cubans suffer so deeply that they simply give up believing in the communist system.
So they see it as coercion.
Exactly. They argue the United States is using maximum economic pressure to force a regime change from the inside. Therefore, when a young person wears the American flag, the government views it as a symptom of external manipulation. They see the teenager as a victim of U.S.-funded propaganda designed to erode national unity.
It is wild when you lay it all out like that. I mean, a single piece of red, white, and blue fabric holds three entirely different realities depending on who you ask.
It really perfectly demonstrates how a cultural symbol gets weaponized by different political factions.
Because to the Cuban government, that T-shirt is a direct threat, a product of decades of economic warfare aimed at destroying their sovereignty. To an American conservative writer, it is undeniable proof of America's moral standing and the universal desire for liberty. But to the actual Cuban teenager wearing it, it might not be a grand political statement about capitalism versus socialism at all. It might just be a plea for a normal, prosperous life where they can afford to buy nice shoes and use the internet without restrictions.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And if we synthesize everything we've covered today, looking at all these diverse sources, we see a very clear mechanical pattern emerging. Whether we are analyzing billions of dollars in remittances flowing through the shadow network of the Cuba, underground rap battles over the moral soul of a nation, or a Stars and Stripes t-shirt worn on the streets of Havana, well, we are watching a society actively rewrite its own rules from the bottom up.
They are building a completely new reality right on top of the old one, and they're using whatever tools they can find.
Exactly. The state still officially controls the primary economy and the political system, but the people are using foreign money, foreign music, and foreign symbols to carve out their own independent space.
And this matters to you, the listener, because it proves a fundamental truth about human nature. The human desire for connection, for prosperity, and for self-expression will always find a way to bypass artificial constraints. Governments can build political walls, they can enforce naval blockades, and they can establish 60-year embargoes, but people will always find the cracks in the concrete.
They really will. They will use an informal remittance courier to fund a bed and breakfast. They will use an imported hip-hop beat to debate domestic economic policy.
Which leaves us with a final, provocative thought to chew on. We have seen how simple things, a wire transfer, a hip-hop beat, a piece of clothing, manage to crack open a 60-year cultural wall. So what happens in the next decade?
That's the big question, right? Because the tools are only going to become more sophisticated and way harder to control.
Right. When high-speed internet becomes fully uncensored and digital, decentralized currencies become widely adopted across Cuba, bypassing the need for physical cash mules entirely, will the real revolution finally happen? Or will it just be a digital movement, streamed live on a smartphone, and paid for by a relative sitting in Miami?
It really forces us to ask what a revolution even looks like in the 21st century.
It does. The next time you see a photo of a young person walking down the streets of Havana wearing an American flag, you have to wonder, are they wearing a symbol of the past, or are they wearing the blueprint for their future?